All right, well, welcome into the Cris Collinsworth podcast, along with my buddy Eric Eager here, and I am coming to you from Crystal Lake in Michigan. This is the week after the Hall of Fame game. Everything's sort of settled down. The Hall of Fame game is one of those games, Eric, as you might imagine, where you get so pumped for the start of football season and you're studying all these star players and they've made all these moves and you've got new rookies in there and you can't wait to see them all, and then none of them play. I mean, none of them play. But it was still good to get football kicked off again. And you've been on the road a little bit here too, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been visited a couple teams over the last 2 weeks. Two of the teams I respect quite a bit, and it's just really fun to just chat football. I think the game is changing so quickly that some of these teams, there's so much work that they have to do day to day that, I think, what's valuable about a service like PFF is that, my team and our group, we're just trying to learn more about the game every single day. And so, just to be able to talk shop with folks that are doing it all the time, while, also hopefully adding some knowledge to the equation. It's always fun. And like you said, I'm really looking forward to the season. I'm glad that the broadcast, with Ben Lindsay at the helm now, went without a hitch on Thursday. I think it's all up from here.
Yeah, I feel sorry for Ben. Ben did so much work, and then we end up talking about the Hall of Famers, for which we should, but it never turns into a game. So, and I know when you go out with the teams, you're talking very specific aspects of their team and the league and their needs. And, you guys get a real understanding sometimes of who they're going to cut, who they're in trouble with, who they need to go find. So let's just go through the NFC. We did the AFC already. I think both of us agree, and I won't speak for you, but it appears that going into the season, the AFC is the much better league right now.
Yeah, I think even if you look at the betting markets, it's all the way, the favorite to win the Super Bowl is from the AFC at like -125, -130, which is, high for this year. But you look at, in the NFC, you have some teams that I think, are pretty good. You look at the Rams, you look at the Bucks, obviously the Packers, maybe a little bit of a tranche below. You have the Cowboys and the 49ers and, and maybe the Eagles, those kind of teams. And then you have a bunch of teams like where you're at, Detroit, New York Giants. You have a bunch of teams. There's going to be one bad team in the NFC that right now we think is bad that's going to make the playoffs. I think that's a surety, but in the AFC, no such, I think, avenue exists for teams like the Jets and the Houston Texans and that kind of thing.
We do understand, though, that there will be a team this year that comes out of nowhere. There will be a Cincinnati Bengals football team that comes out of this season, and it's always fun to try and find them right in advance. And what are those that confluence of events that happen to the Cincinnati Bengals, where it's like every time I go to the Kentucky Derby, I never pick the winner. One year I did. I never picked the winner. And then as soon as the race is over, you go back to the racing farm and go, that's why the sucker won, right? And I think I'm going to be doing the same thing in the NFC this year. So let's just start. We'll start with the team that more fans seem to love or hate than any other, the Dallas Cowboys. And this is a team that had the number one ranked offense a season ago. When you look at them up and down the line of scrimmage, if anything, they should be so much better even on defense than what they were a season ago. And yet it's hard to look at this team right now and go, they didn't lose a little ground to the Philadelphia Eagles during the course of the offseason. What's your initial take on the Cowboys?
Yeah, this sort of happens every single year, right, where they're the favorite to win the division. And we're all saying, in April or May, we're saying, look, it's a coin flip as to whether or not Dallas, because I agree with you. I think, Dallas wins 12 games last year, and we're all like, oh yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Like, they have playmakers on defense, and they have a good play caller and a great quarterback and weapons. And so of course they should. But people forget that at this time last year, the Washington football team at the time was creeping up. They were the sexy pick of all of the contrarians and the TV people. When Dallas, this is your game, when Dallas faced Tampa Bay to open the season, Washington had gotten all the way down to plus 150 in some markets to win the NFC East. Great defense, everybody thought. Ryan Fitzpatrick is plucky, that kind of thing. And you're sort of seeing the exact same dynamic right now with the Philadelphia Eagles, where, their win total opens 8.5. It's now like 9.5, 10. And you see great players on that team. And it's coming at the expense of the Dallas Cowboys, who, they lost James Washington to an injury. They lost Amari Cooper to a trade. We don't necessarily know if Zeke is going to be any good anymore. The defense is hit or miss, right? They're playmakers, but obviously Trayvon Diggs gives up a lot of yards. So I think everybody has the same opinion about Dallas as they did last year, which is, if everything comes together, this team's going to win 12 games, and we're going to be talking about them in contention in the NFC. It's just that if one or two things goes wrong, like let's say CeeDee Lamb, who I like as one of the candidate to lead the league in receiving, if CeeDee Lamb gets hurt, this team is probably screwed. If DeMarcus Lawrence or Micah Parsons get injured, like this, so the team is pretty fragile. But I think if things stay okay, they're going to be pretty good. And I think people give Mike McCarthy a lot of flack for I think reasonable things, decisions and stuff like that in game. But I think he's an above average NFL coach. So I'm not as down on Dallas as I think people around the league are, but I can see where it could go bad for them.
Well, here's the one stat that has to go right for them. They were 6-0 in the division last year. They dominated that division. Yeah. They were 6-6 outside the division. So that means they weren't really a great team. They were a good team inside a bad division. And so now they're going to have a lot of things go right. But you're right in that all reports about Dak coming out of training camp is that he looks fantastic. Their problem is at the wide receiver position. They let Amari Cooper go. He's in Cleveland. Michael Gallup, ACL, out the first month. James Washington with an injury issue now. So a lot of this is going to fall into the lap of CeeDee Lamb, and a lot of it's going to fall on Dalton Schultz. He had a good year last year. He was their second leading receiver a season ago. And I can't help but wonder if it doesn't mean a little bit more Tony Pollard. As much as they want to promote Ezekiel Elliott down there, this is kind of his last year, sort of guaranteed that he is going to get that kind of money without a redo or a release or something. What do you think about the idea of that running back competition and how thin they are at the receiver position right now?
Yeah, it's big. I mean, we've seen wide receiver depth is where good teams fail to become great teams, right? So, you look at the Green Bay Packers with Adams, you look at the Chiefs with Tyreek Hill, you look at, how the Bengals took off. It was Chase, of course, but it's also T. Higgins having 100-yard games in the playoffs, right? And that's a leak for Dallas. I think Lamb's going to be, he's 14-1 right now to lead the league in receiving. He was 18-1 prior to some people like me gassing him up on Twitter. And so I think people believe he's going to get the 110, 120 catches that he needs. But, to your point, like they need it out of Dalton Schultz. They need it out of Pollard. The thing that's very interesting when I look at the data with Pollard and Zeke is Pollard's very much a more effective runner, 3.6 yards per carry after contact the last 2 years, 5.5 yards per carry total. Zeke is nowhere close to that, but teams respect Zeke. When you look at like the tracking data and stuff, like teams respect Zeke in the play action game. And so I every time you kind of like get a new piece of data, you appreciate guys like Kellen Moore a little bit more because you're like, why are they playing Zeke over Tony Pollard? And it's because the play action game works a little bit better when he's in the game.
And protection.
And
You know, I
protection.
mean,
He's
Zeke,
great.
the one thing he is, he's a good pass protector.
Yeah. And so I think what they need to do, because the hard part is I think one of the biggest misnomers in football is that a good pass catching running back you can deploy him more than just being a good pass catching running back. And I think with Pollard, like he's going to get touches. I think they just need to be more creative in getting him touches in the run game and, you know, in the screen game. I don't think they can like split him out and do all that kind of stuff. That's like Marshall Faulk was a guy who could do that, you know, Alvin Kamara, but like, I think it's rare anywhere else. They just really have to, you know, hope that Michael Gallup comes back healthy for when it really matters, playoff time, to have a secondary option to CeeDee Lamb.
Defensively, it's going to be an interesting year. No Randy Gregory now to help offset Micah Parsons, but DeMarcus Lawrence kind of needs to be that guy. He's only had 14 and a half sacks the last 3 years combined. Mm-hmm. And maybe the other swing guy now is Dante Fowler. Is Dante Fowler enough at this point in his career to sort of take some of the pressure off of these other pass rushing threats, Lawrence and Parsons?
I don't think so. I mean, to me, it's this defense is they're trying to out versatile you, right? So last year they had Parsons, who was a very good edge player, very good linebacker, was really good instinctually. Like if you look at some of the data as far as not biting on play action stuff, he was a veteran linebacker last year in anything but name. They went and got Anthony Barr, a guy who for Minnesota was very versatile as far as being able to play, you know, sort of the traditional off ball, but to be able to come off the line of scrimmage as an edge player at times. Jaron Kearse, another former Viking, was a guy who played linebacker for them, played safety for them, played slot corner, was fantastic last year. I think that's really they don't have. I don't think if they just lined up and played defense straight out, they could beat teams. But I think when they use like, you know, versatility and creativity, that's where they can get some benefits. So, you know, Fowler has been mostly a disappointment. I think he'll get some cleanup stuff, you know, with Parsons and Barr coming off, you know, on blitzes and stuff like that. Jaron Kearse as well, who, you know, Kearse had something like more than 10 pressures, more than 10 pass breakups, more than like 20. Like he did everything for that team last year. And, you know, I think that they need to stay in that creative range in order to be effective defensively. They also need to like hope they get lucky again, because, you know, their corner getting 11 interceptions or whatever is likely not to repeat itself.
Yeah, Diggs seems to be the great debate. Every time he gives up a big play in practice, they go crazy in Dallas, and Twitter flies off the handle. 11 interceptions is 11 interceptions in this league, no matter how you slice it. But to give up over 1,000 yards, that's the most in the league. So in the history of football, Marcus Peters used to be this way, but the boom or bust thing, that I'm either picking it off or you're scoring a touchdown, I don't know where that balance is between those two. I just can't remember a player like him.
Yeah, well, I think like a good comparison is like, I don't know if you remember, he played for the Bengals, Deltha O'Neal.
Yeah.
Deltha O'Neal had 2 seasons, I believe, of 9 or more interceptions. You know, he was extremely effective when he was hot, you know. But you also saw him get benched a number of times in his career, right? So in Denver, he had 9 picks as a second-year player, and 2 years later, he was playing nickel for them. And then he goes to Cincy, leads the NFL with 10 interceptions in 2005, and then he's playing nickel for them the next year because, again, it's a very streaky position. And, you know, I think, you know, I've been hard on Diggs, but I think you take a step back and say, well, there aren't shutdown corners in the NFL anymore. Even a guy like, you know, Jalen Ramsey gets beat at times. If you can make the big plays, like, you know, again, it's tough because you don't want to give up 1,000 yards, but you also don't want to throw out the 11 interceptions in that, you know, in that analysis.
For sure. Well, let's move on to probably their primary nemesis for this season, and at least you would think, and that's the Philadelphia Eagles, who ultimately did go 9-8. They did get beat and get crushed by Tampa in the playoffs. It was no game at all. The one everybody's talking about is they trade for A.J. Brown, which I agree with. I think he's a fantastic fit for this team. But they also signed Jordan Davis, the big, huge guy out of Georgia, the 6'6", 341 pounds, just run stuffer, which may allow those linebackers to play in the passing game a little bit more.
Yep.
And they draft Nakobe Dean out of Georgia, who was one of the top linebackers coming out of the draft. Clearly, pass defense has to be the focus. They ranked 31st in pass defense, or ranked 31st in sacks, and 29th, 29th in sacks, 31st on defense. So, and they completed a completion percentage of almost 70%. So this is a team that really gave up a lot of plays in the passing game a season ago. And as much as we want to talk about Jalen Hurts and Miles Sanders and A.J. Brown and all the guys, this is the question for the Philadelphia Eagles. Can they get better on the defensive side? They certainly drafted that way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this Eagles team is the quintessential, how do you go from being bad to okay? You win at the line of scrimmage, right? And they win at the line of scrimmage on offense. Mailata, Lane Johnson, Kelsey. Then they win on the line of scrimmage defensively. I mean, so they get Jordan Davis. They already have Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, Josh Sweat. They have a guy and they brought in Hassan Reddick, the former Temple Owl, coming back to Philadelphia. He's been involved in 28 sacks the last 2 years. So and that's with two separate teams, right? That's with Arizona and Carolina. So he brings something there. One of the things I was looking at as a part of my research last year, I call them key performance indicators. So how often do you show a certain coverage and then play another one? How often do you run stunts? How creative are you defensively? And when we looked at Dallas, extremely creative defensively, as we just talked about. The Eagles were about as vanilla as it got. Now, were they vanilla because they didn't have talent and they go and get talent? They get James Bradbury from the Giants, who had a great year in 2020, fell off a little bit in 2021. I like buying a corner on the dip a little bit there. At safety, they're pretty good with Anthony Harris, and at linebacker, that's where Nakobe Dean's going to have to be good because they haven't been good there in forever. But on the front, does having that front that's a lot more sturdy, allow them to be more multiple? Because then all the question for me for the Eagles comes down to, do the Eagles play to Jalen Hurts' strength? Because if they play to his strength, I think they win 10 or 11 games, no doubt. They run the football, they play to his strengths. Or do they try to figure out if he is a long-term answer for them at quarterback? Do they throw the ball 30 times to learn about him? Because I think they do, there's a risk that they might not be as good as some of their fans want them to be, because that is going to require Jalen Hurts to do some uncomfortable things for him. And it might be good for them long term, but with respect to this season, it might cause them to be a little down relative to expectations.
Yeah, I can't imagine that, though. Can you? Even though they've spent so much money at the wide receiver position, this was the best rushing team in football, and Jalen Hurts led them in rushing. Right. As much as you want to talk about anybody else, Miles Sanders averaged 5.5 yards a carry and had 754 yards, but Jalen Hurts had 784. So, this is a team that's going to have balance in the running game. They're going to be tough to defend in the passing game. If you put out there A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, that's a pretty good start right there to have to defend as far as a big three is concerned. But I agree with you. This whole year is going to be, is Jalen Hurts good enough? That's the question. And eventually, here's the problem. Eventually, you're going to get in a shootout kind of game against Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers or Matthew Stafford, and you've got to beat them. Nobody's playing in the NFL with the hopes of making it to the playoffs. Your only goal is you're trying to win the entire thing. Believe me, getting close to winning a Super Bowl with firsthand knowledge is nothing. It's nothing. And so that's the question. At the end of this year, is your opinion that, yes, that we will have those questions about Jalen Hurts and they'll move on, or that they're going to go, he's good enough, he's our guy?
I don't think so. I think that it's too much, right? It's too much now with quarterbacks, right? You don't see middle of the road contracts for quarterbacks anymore. And so if the if the choice that you have is to play out Hurts and then let him go or trade him to a desperate team, and there's going to be plenty of desperate teams. Look at all the aging quarterbacks in the NFL. That's preferable to paying him $45 million a year, right? Don't you think? I just, Kyler Murray to me is a question mark at $45 million a year. And if that's the case, then I think a guy like Jalen Hurts is going to struggle to provide value at that market number.
All right. So now the obvious comparison as a running quarterback is Lamar, right? Mm-hmm. So, and Lamar had the MVP year because he did great throwing the ball. He led the league in touchdown passes. And so he's jumped that hurdle. What would it take in your mind for Jalen Hurts to jump that hurdle? Is it enough to get back into the playoffs again? Does he have to prove, when you have A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert, that teams, they got to play him in man coverage, right? That's the only way you can stop their running game, and that's exactly what happens with Baltimore in Lamar Jackson. So you play man coverage. There's no way in hell you can cover A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith one-on-one, both down the field. I think the Eagles are a little bit of a scary team. I just do. I think Riddick adds a serious element. The only thing you wonder about is Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox. Are they still going to be good enough to maintain, especially Graham coming off that Achilles? Are they going to be enough to complement the other people that they've added with Riddick and some of the young players that we talked about? Because if they are, and they all sort of hit on defense, and that added investment in A.J. Brown, they've got the offensive line. I think this team's a little bit scary. I kind of agree with the pundits out there.
Yeah, I think that they're going to the win totals moved a lot, and I sort of agree with that money. I think, to answer your first question, I think Hurts has to be like an MVP candidate to earn that second contract. I think this team's making the playoffs even if Hurts plays at the level he played last year, which is like a 73 PFF grade, 87 passer rating if you count, if you just do regular season, 23 big time throws, 18 turnover worthy play. Like, all those numbers are fine if you're paying the guy less than $1 million. In fact, it's one of the best values in the entire league. If you're paying that guy $45 million per year, then that it becomes harder, right? And I think, as we talked about on a previous show, I think the hardest problem in football analytics and football in general is not finding a quarterback that can be useful for you as a rookie. It's determining if a quarterback who is useful to you as a rookie is worth that max deal, because there's no gradation on it, right? Like, you are either paying the guy the max or you aren't. And that is we've seen it. We've seen with Wentz, we've seen with Goff, we've seen, the Browns make the right decision with Mayfield. When you make that commitment to the quarterback, you take away all the things that made the quarterback, well, not all the things, but you take away a great deal of the things that made the quarterback great by taking away $40 million from his supporting cast. And that's a hard problem. And I think with Hurts, I think if Hurts has like an MVP caliber season, I think we're going to be like, okay, then fine, do it. I think anything less, we're all going to say, look, he's a good quarterback and he's good because of the support. But beyond that, I think it's a big question.
Yeah, and the question becomes then, what if he signed for $25 to $30 million? Well, what if he were willing to take that? Because that's the case study we really haven't seen. A good, not great quarterback. And I can remember almost feeling like the Cowboys were feeling that way about Dak for a little while. Like, they wanted to slot him in some in-between position. He holds out rightfully and gets the deal that he wants. So the Eagles are a really, really interesting team to me going into this season. Let's move on to the New York Giants here. Brian Daboll takes over, a guy that I really think a lot of. This is their fourth coach since they fired Tom Coughlin, which obviously, looking back on it now, was not the right move to make for this football franchise. Horrible cap situation. There's no question about it. They've only got 19 wins in the last 4 years. And Wink Martindale takes over on the defensive side. So you're going to see a lot more pressure, a lot more high risk kind of play on defense. But we get right down to offensively, this team ranked next to last in passing and rushing, and Daniel Jones, this is the year, right? They did not pick up that fifth-year option. And if Daniel Jones is going to make it, he has to make it this year.
Yeah, and they're building. I think last year they got Daniel Jones weapons, which was Galladay, Tony, and they sort of forgot to handle the line of scrimmage. They forgot to get coaching in the right place with Garrett and Judge kind of struggling a little bit. Now they get a new coach. I think most people believe that that's an upgrade. And then they really, they fortify the line of scrimmage. You look on the offensive side of the ball, you have Evan Neal. Andrew Thomas was fantastic last year and emerging after a rough rookie year. Defensively, you have Leonard Williams, you have Azeez Ojulari, who had 8 sacks last year, and then you have Kayvon Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence. I think that gives them a chance. And they had the easiest schedule in the NFL per our metrics. I think all those things give the Giants a chance. I think a lot of people are betting the Giants over 7 wins just based upon those things alone. And if Daniel Jones has like an okay, like Blake Bortles type 2017 season, I think a lot of us could see them doing well. Issue with the Giants is the secondary. They lost James Bradbury because they didn't have their cap in order. Dory Jackson is their number 1 corner. That to me in a conference in a division where you're facing CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, that's going to be the test for the Giants, is whether they can be decent defensively with the secondary that questionable.
Yeah, and you've got Wink Martindale, who wants to bring some pressure and put pressure on that secondary. He was spoiled in Baltimore, and actually last year you can say because they lost their 2 top cornerbacks on defense that they paid the price. They gave up those big plays that you're always afraid of if you come with some of those heavy blitz packages. It's interesting. You went through that whole thing, and the one name you left off was Saquon Barkley. And to some extent, that's probably a product of PFF in general. But Saquon Barkley is sort of in that same sort of spot that Daniel Jones is in now. He needs to show something. Running backs in general, getting a second contract has proven not to be a good idea. Yeah. And he has had so many ankle and ACL and so many different issues other than his rookie year. We haven't seen the guy that was that supposed to be that generational talent.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that one of the things to note is with an easy schedule, with the defense, with an offense that could be improved, if you're looking at a fantasy football value, I do think Saquon Barkley is there just because he has the talent. They're going to be playing in good game scripts, so he might be running the ball more than he has been for past Giants teams who are worse football teams. So that's something to think about is Barkley in fantasy. But I don't know what it means long-term for them. Dable comes from a Buffalo Bills team that was notoriously PFF-y at the running back position. And so does he let Barkley go? Does he trade him at the deadline? There's a number of things that could happen here. But I think in the best case scenario for the Giants play well as a team, and Barkley is a huge beneficiary of that because of the game scripts that they get running the football and that kind of thing.
The interesting position for me is tight end. No Evan Ingram, no Kyle Rudolph, no Caden Smith. The guys that I knew aren't there. And so tight end, and you think when you're trying to develop a quarterback, that's a key position. So somebody out of that, I don't even know all their names, Bellinger and Mayorik or whatever it is. I mean, just a bunch of guys, somebody I assume they like, or they wouldn't have made those kinds of moves. And Thibodeau needs to be a star, right? He just flat out needs to be a star being drafted where he was. But to see, Andrew Thomas, Evan Neal, but John Feliciano, a steady pro. Mark Lewinsky from the Colts, a nasty kind of guy playing up front. That was clearly the worst offensive line, or at least PFF thought so a season ago. Washington Commanders, this team has put all their eggs in the Carson Wentz basket at this point. And you hear reports coming out of Washington that some of the accuracy issues are starting to show up, and is that going to end up being a problem? They've got some of the off-field situations with the Snyder family that are going on, but always sort of the rock in the middle of that seems to be Ron Rivera, who always puts a pretty good product out there. But the stunning part of Washington a season ago is just the fact that defensive line, with all those first-round draft picks, didn't get it done, partly due to injury. But, when you spend that amount of draft capital on one position and they have an average year at best, and Chase Young, injured, but that was stunning to me.
Yeah, and this comes back to a tenet that we've talked about at PFF for a long time, which is if you can't layer the coverage in the back end of the defense, the defensive line has less of an impact than you think, right? And if you're facing great quarterbacks, it's going to be harder to sack them. In the 2020 year, when the Washington football team made the playoffs, these are the quarterbacks that they faced, that they beat. They beat Carson Wentz. They beat Brandon Allen, who came in for an injured Joe Burrow. They beat Andy Dalton. They beat Ben Roethlisberger, Nick Mullins, and then finally in your game, the infamous game where they played Jalen Hurts and then Nate Sudfeld. Those are the quarterbacks that they beat to go 7-9 and make the playoffs in 2020. In 2021, these are the quarterbacks that beat them: Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, Jameis Winston, Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers. Then they had Dak Prescott twice, Jalen Hurts twice. So that when you play better quarterbacks, you play better teams. You also had some COVID there too with them. That's not to be sort of glossed over. But they played better teams, and so quarterbacks get rid of the ball more quickly. They diagnose coverages better, and your defensive line doesn't quite do as well. You also had the Chase Young injury, but yeah, it's interesting. Now when you come back here, their win total 7. I actually don't mind the over here, just because they were dealing with such poor play on offense last year. Scott Turner was actually doing a good job. He was running a lot of motions. He was running a lot of play action. He was hitting a lot of the easy buttons, and Taylor Heineke just couldn't take advantage. Antonio Gibson couldn't take advantage. I think they have upgrades in Brian Robinson. I think they have upgrades in Wentz. Wentz isn't great, but I think he's better than Taylor Heineke. They have an easy schedule as well. This entire division does. They get Jahan Dotson to pair with Terry McLaurin. I actually do like this team relative to market expectations. It's just like, where's the ceiling when you have Wentz at quarterback?
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the issue for them. I don't want to put down everybody, because they did have some guys that stepped up front. Starting with Jonathan Allen, 9 sacks on the year last year, so he played well. Where they're really hurting right now is the linebacker position. I mean, we have seen that they have discussed Rivera during the offseason, said, "Oh yeah, we definitely have to upgrade the position," and yet they didn't. And so they come back. I think it's Jamin, not Jammin. I can't believe a linebacker doesn't change his name to Jamin Davis.
Yeah.
That would actually probably help his play.
They used a first round pick on an off-ball linebacker, and he hasn't panned out yet. Same with Arizona twice.
He did the same thing. I think he was from Kentucky, right? And I remember watching him. I'm like, yeah, he's flying all over the place, but he's not making any plays. And I guess he didn't make any plays there. So they're right back to Cole Holcomb again in the middle of that defense making the calls. But so this is a team that will have some issues. And Carson Wentz has to be an accurate quarterback. I mean, and we saw with the Colts that they schemed up some big plays and he missed them, or at least in the games that I did with them. And so that's an interesting go. So let's flip over down to, all right, I'm going to take that back. We're at the end of that division now. Tell me what the bet is that you like out of that division. What is the one that's sticking out there that you go, I like that a lot?
Yeah, at current market prices, I'm going to take the Commanders over 8 wins.
Over 8. What is Dallas? What's the over under on Dallas's wins?
Dallas is 10. Eagles are 9.5. I do have a bet on the Eagles over 8.5, but like this number's changed so much because people are so hot on the Eagles. The Giants are 7. Giants at 7's. I mean, you're basically, to your point early in the podcast, which is like, one of these teams is going to be surprising. The question is which one. And I think the Commanders are being a little bit I think that Carson Wentz and the Commanders are being a little bit misunderstood. Like, I think we all still hold Wentz to the standard that he set in 2017 when he was an MVP candidate, when just simply being a league average quarterback will do wonders for this Commanders team.
What would I do? I think I would take a chance on the Eagles getting to 10 wins. I just think when you look around, you go, okay, if I don't know anything about, take the helmets off, take the logos off, take all that stuff off, would I rather have the Eagles football team or the Cowboys football team? At the quarterback position, I would rather have the Cowboys football team, and that moves the needle so much. We all know that. But when you take the rest of the team, it's not even close. In my opinion, I'd rather have their offensive line. I'd rather have their receivers. I'd rather have their tight ends. I'd rather have their defensive line. Linebackers, I'd rather have Dallas in secondary. I'd probably rather have Dallas.
But yeah, I mean, but that's like where the rub is in football now. You have
no doubt
veteran quarterback on a max deal. Team's not as good. Team with a lowly paid quarterback, great roster, right? Like that's the competition right now in the NFL. And of course, like in the AFC, you have great quarterbacks on rookie deals and great rosters like the Bengals and the Chargers. But the question is still the same, right? Like can quarterback, and I think Kellen Moore is better than people believe. So Kellen Moore, Dak Prescott, I think makes a great deal of the difference up. And, Sirianni and they have Shane Steichen started calling plays for them last year for the Eagles. It was pretty good with the Chargers as well, prior to Anthony Lynn getting fired. And I think that the question becomes like, how much better is Dak? And, I think if Dak's healthy, he's that much better. I think Dak is in that upper tier of quarterbacks if healthy.
All right, that's my. I'm taking a shot. I'm going the Eagles. I'll be laughed out of everywhere. You can have fun with me as the year goes along on that one. Let's go to the North now. Let's go to the Chicago Bears. Probably as low an expectation. What's the win total? What's the over under for the Bears?
Yeah, we're seeing 6 in a lot of places. 6.5 is where it opened. I mean. One thing, if you're new to betting, I think is big, is look at the team's next season salary cap situation. We talked about this with the Jaguars last time. The Jags have no cap space the next year. They have to win this year. They have to try, right? And that's a big thing when you're betting season-long stuff, is whether a team needs to try, right? In this division, you have a couple of teams that couldn't be more different. You have the Bears, who have the league lead in cap space next year, but almost the worst roster in football, in my opinion, right now. The Bears, if you bet over on the Bears, you're making not only a bet that they'll be good, but also better than the market number, but also a bet that they're going to try. And what I mean by try is like they're going to acquire somebody in the middle of the season if somebody gets hurt, as opposed to just putting a practice squad player in a place. Like there are a number of different things. That to me means either you don't bet the Bears at all or you bet the Bears under, because I don't think the Bears are actually I think the Bears are where the Lions were a season ago, which is just, we're going to bleed out for a year. We're going to let the thing happen. We're going to come back next year with more cap space and more of a chance. Ryan Poles got I think took the job in large part because he could build the team in his image. Well, that takes a year, I think, if you look at some of the issues that they have. Paramount of them, Roquan Smith holding in, and wanting a long-term deal and asking for a trade yesterday.
Yeah, that's a big one, but they've been through that before. They were through that with him in his rookie year as well. So I think he'll be able to come in and play. The big outlier a season ago, though, was Robert Quinn with 18 and a half sacks. I mean, that was just unbelievable. And so now Khalil Mack is gone, who ended up with 6 sacks in just 7 games. So there are going to be some issues there, but the biggest thing for me is like who's playing receiver for this football team. Darnell Mooney's a nice player, and I have a lot of respect for him. But no Allen Robinson, who probably, if we ever felt sorry for a player in the NFL, it would be Allen Robinson, just because of the string of quarterbacks that he's played with during the course of his career. But Justin Fields has to play NFL football. He has to quit holding on to the ball. And I know he has skills running it, but 58 sacks, I'm sorry, that's on the quarterback. I mean, Tom Brady could play in this league at age 97, and he would not take 58 sacks no matter what he did. That's on the quarterback position.
Yeah, for sure. And that was always the knock on him coming out, was that, he was more of he didn't necessarily I don't necessarily have the skill set to talk about this, but like basically the question was always like, did he process the game well? Did he in the pocket, was he willing to sort of hit his back foot and throw the football and trust the offense? And, in the rookie year, he did little to dispel it. Yeah, he did little to sort of change any of our minds on anything with him. He had a great arm, great athleticism. We all expected that. But, there were games where he didn't give his team a chance because he wasn't willing to get rid of the football. And that hurt them. The other team in this division, Chris, that is the complete opposite for the other reasons, though, the Minnesota Vikings, right? New GM, just like the Bears, right? But the Vikings, when you look at their cap space next year, they don't have that much. And, there were a lot of deals left over for older players like Adam Thielen and Harrison Smith and Donnell Hunter, and that they had to smooth out this offseason to become cap compliant. A lot of stuff that Rick Spielman had left Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. But this team built a roster to at least be competitive in a weak NFC this year. And so when I look at their win total at 9, I think I don't have to guess as to whether or not the Vikings are going to try this year. They're going to try. The question for them is whether or not they're going to be good.
Yeah, and we can make fun of Kirk Cousins all we want, but the numbers say Kirk Cousins gets it done. 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. You take that all day, short of having one of the superstar quarterbacks in this league. You talked about Adam Thielen. He had injuries all year last year. He was a shell of himself. They get Irv Smith back for this football season. Justin Jefferson. I think you make the argument that he is
the best wide receiver in football.
3 or 4 receivers in the game, no matter what you want to talk about with him. He's over 3,000 yards his first 2 years. That's an NFL record. It's been amazing. And Kevin O'Connell is going to add an element of the easy Rams throws. And I think he's got the players that are going to be willing to get in there and block at the receiver position. And so I tend to think that Dalvin Cook, who when he's right is one of the best players in all of football. He had an off year last year, falling from 1,500 yards down to 1,100 yards. It's still great, but if there's a player in the league that I look at and I go, who might just be that player that pops off the screen this year, it could be Dalvin Cook. I think this offense, bringing the receivers in tighter, getting Thielen, getting Jefferson to block, getting Smith back, it would not surprise me at all if Dalvin Cook, both running and receiving, ends up one of those guys that has a monster year.
Yeah, there's a really good bet to make, I think, on the Vikings, which is, as you said, Kirk Cousins puts up great numbers. I think that there are, issues like last year they led the league in 3 and outs, right? I think maybe the sequencing that they could have, moving on from the Kubiaks to O'Connell can help. But he certainly puts up great numbers. Jefferson, as you said, NFL record. If they and they have not lost a game that Kirk Cousins has started by more than one score since Christmas Day of 2020. So it's been like over a year since they got killed in a game when Kirk played, which is actually I think instructive. If you flip a couple of those one score losses, they're a winning football team. And if let's say the Packers fall off a little bit because of their receivers or whatever, and they win 11 games and they win the division, Kevin O'Connell is the coach of the year in the NFL, right? And at 20-1 market prices, that's a really good bet, right? Because the Vikings are probably 25-30% to win the division. So, that's a 3-1, 4-1 bet. You're getting 20-1 because I don't think Cousins is going to put up better numbers. Like, I kind of think he is who he is. And we've all baked into the cake that Kirk Cousins puts up great numbers and this team can't win. We've all baked into the cake that Justin Jefferson is an amazing player. That if they do the same thing they've always done and they win 11 games, everybody's going to be like, well, what was the catalyst? And everybody's going to look at Kevin O'Connell. So, the awards markets are all about narratives. I think that's one that it's such a good bet to bet O'Connell to win Coach of the Year because the path is very clear. And the guys that win Coach of the Year, Vrabel had Tannehill, Stefanski had Baker. The coaches that win Coach of the Year have Kirk Cousins type quarterbacks.
Yeah, and so many times it comes down to, once again, injured players, can they come back? When I look at the Vikings, the key position for me is they're a different team when Danielle Hunter can play. They just are a different team, and he's played 7 games the last 2 years. You add Zadarius Smith, who missed all of last year, basically, with the Green Bay Packers. If something were to happen to where those 2 players reverted to their healthy form, think about that for the Minnesota Vikings. Mm-hmm. They would have 2 monsters on the outside, and we've seen Zadarius prove that he can play that inside linebacker kind of role and blitz from anywhere. He had 26 sacks in 19 and 20. He had an injured year last year. Does that mean he's finished as a player? I don't know, maybe. But if he's not, and Danielle Hunter is back, and you've got Eric Kendricks, from what I'm reading about the Vikings, it sounds like they're going to be playing a lot more zone this year. So the Patrick Petersons of the world become a player that can hang in for 17 games and be there at the end of the year. Harrison Smith can be there at the end of the year. Other than the Philadelphia, I think the big 4, right, we talk about in the NFC going to do great this year. But to me, the other 2 that I like are the Minnesota Vikings and the Philadelphia Eagles.
I think when you look, so the one thing that the Rams did that no one really paid attention to until basically this offseason is the Rams, they played a stars and scrubs approach, right? They have, they pay a lot of money to Donald, they pay a lot of money to Kupp, and they kind of like backfill with late round picks. Now the Vikings don't have the late round pick success lately that the Rams had, but the Rams got by with that because they rarely got injured. The sports science there was terrific. The Vikings, when the last time the Vikings were good in 2017, they had the same 11 starters in week 1 on defense as they did in the NFC Championship game. That has not been the case the last few years, right? As you said with Danielle Hunter and the injuries to Kendricks and so on. If they can stay healthy, right, and there's obviously that connection with the Rams, and maybe O'Connell's bringing some of his people over to sort of apply those principles. Mike Zimmer was very much an old school, rub some dirt on it, practice with pads kind of guy. If O'Connell is more progressive as far as practicing and stuff like that, maybe they have fewer injuries than they have had before, and then the whole thing does come together for them. That's I think the thing. And so there's ways to bet the Vikings. I think the biggest one is the O'Connell Coach of the Year. I think that one, if you can bet it, it's going to be a great payoff if it happens. And I don't necessarily see them as a Super Bowl team, but I do think that they can be better than what we've seen the last couple of years.
Hey, let's talk about the Green Bay Packers for a second here. This is a team that was the number 1 seed 2 straight years, lost a home playoff game in each of those years to Tampa and San Francisco. Rodgers is now 39. He's going to make $42 and $59.5 million the next 2 years. No question, cap hell follows Aaron Rodgers with the Green Bay Packers. No Devontae Adams going to be there this year. How different should we anticipate this team being? They draft Christian Watson, but he's got issues, physical issues. He's not going to be out there at camp, so I'm not sure what kind of factor he's going to be able to be. Alan Lazard's a good player. I would never say anything bad about Alan Lazard. He blocks. He's tough. He makes the big plays. Is he a number one? That's maybe a stretch. Randall Cobb, Sammy Watkins, Amari Rogers, a draft pick from a year or two ago. Maybe the key guy in this whole thing is Robert Tonyan coming back, tore his ACL a season ago. I mean, talking about Rogers, has to have somebody that you go into this season that you can count on, because the alternative is this running game with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon is going to be tough. I mean, they're going to be a strength of this team, but you can't take the ball out of the back-to-back MVP Aaron Rodgers' hands and have that as a plan this year.
Yeah, we looked at tracking data, and Tonyan being out, I think, really hurt them, because when you looked at play action passes and then running plays, what you saw was that linebackers flowed to the ball more quickly on Green Bay than all but like one or two teams in the NFL, meaning there wasn't a whole lot that they were scared of. And I think if you have a tight end on the backside who can kind of run that crosser on play action, if you have, multiple receivers that can hurt you versus just having one, I think it helps that, right? Because I think the Packers offense, Rodgers did win the MVP, but they weren't as scary last year as they were in 2020. I think that, they have to improve there. Now, they have pieces. I mean, Cobb has been a good player in the league. Lazard, as you said, is good. Romeo Doubs was a guy that we really liked coming out. And Sammy Watkins, for all the crap he gets for his contract, he has 2 100-yard games in AFC Championship games for the Chiefs. Like, he's a guy that they're looking for. Can one guy step up in the playoffs when you're facing a team that has good secondary? Because teams with good secondaries can break down the number one receiver, and we've seen that in Green Bay for a decade now. Can they stop secondary receivers, right? And I was at the AFC Championship game where the Titans spent a lot of resources to stop Tyreek Hill, and Sammy Watkins is 15 yards behind everybody for the game-winning touchdown. And that's kind of what they're looking for here with their receiving core.
As funny as it is, for the first time, I like the Green Bay Packers because of their defense. I think they have a chance to win the Super Bowl because of their defense. Rashawn Gary's become a different player. He led them with 9.5 sacks. Preston Smith is good enough. Had 9 sacks a season ago. Rasul Douglas came out of nowhere to have 5 picks and add depth to that back end. Jair Alexander didn't even play last year. He played in 4 games with the shoulder injury. Kenny Clark now has help, and Devontae Wyatt, a guy I thought looked like Warren Sapp playing the 3 technique inside. On the back end, we talked about Rasul Douglas, Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, I thought was fantastic a season ago. And Adrian Amos and Darnell Savage are one of the best combos at safety that we have in the league. This is a defense that will have to dominate. Their running game will have to dominate. Their offensive line, are they going to get Bakhtiari? They're going to get Elton Jenkins back? I don't know. But this is a defense, I think, that has a chance to really hold down teams in the North.
Yeah, for sure. And as you said, like, there's no weaknesses on that defense, right? There's great players, Amos, Alexander, Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, by the way, if you're looking for a way to bet the Packers. Rashawn Gary, now the price has gone up, but like Rashawn Gary to win Defensive Player of the Year, I think it's like 30-1 now. I think we got it at like 75-1. Rashawn Gary, I think that this is a 20-sack season for him. So that's one to monitor.
Whoa. What's the over/under on that number?
I think I have to look at DraftKings. I'm sure it's like 9.5, which I'll take the over on that. But essentially, like, if he wins Defensive Player of the Year, it's probably due to 20-something sacks, and you're getting, if you get a 30-1 payout on a player like that, that's solid, because again, the Green Bay Packers have all of the ingredients. They're going to be a playoff team. The offense is going to be a little bit underwhelming at first. The narrative is going to be that the defense is carrying them, and They have a great secondary, which means, Gary will have another quarter of a second to get to the quarterback on some downs. And he was third in the NFL in pressures already last year. And there's an article on PFF.com that I wrote. You, generally speaking, the defensive player of the year was better the year before than he was the year that he wins it. So Gary was already an amazing player. If he comes in and gets the stats associated with being that this year, I think the narrative is going to drive him to the award.
All right. Well, final team, Detroit Lions, 3-13 and won a season ago. But two of their wins they were in the North. They lost 11 straight, then they won 3 out of the last 6. So a little bit of hope coming in. And Dan Campbell, as much as people beat up Matt Patricia and didn't like his style and he was too hard and he was all that sort of stuff, it feels like they love Dan Campbell that much on this football team. And it's going to come back again to, is Jared Goff that guy that's going to be able to lead them?
Yeah, for sure. And this is a team that has a lot of talent. I like Detroit. I like Detroit over. I've been very vocal about that. It's been kind of fun because I think Dan Campbell is very like a guy I grew up watching in Minnesota, Mike Tice, where he's fun and people like him and he gives away some information and play. Like, my thing with Campbell is, especially if he's not calling plays, he does all the right things on fourth down. He goes for the right fourth downs. He's aggressive and the players love him, right? What else do you need in a coach, right? Like, that's what Vrabel has. Vrabel's not even as good at fourth downs as Campbell. That's what Tomlin has. Like, I like that. But then you look, again, at the line of scrimmage. You have Taylor Decker, Frank Ragnow. You have Penei Sewell on the up front. 2 of those guys were injured last year, why you saw Goff not necessarily perform as well. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you have Charles Harris, who was a first-round pick for the Dolphins, didn't work, was very good last year. You have Aiden Hutchinson, our guy, Hutch Podcast, YouTube, PFF. It's going to be hard. And then they have the second easiest schedule in the NFL. They don't play any games after 1 o'clock Eastern. The only game they have that's not a Sunday at noon, if you look at Central Time, is the Thanksgiving game they have against the Bills. They have one of the best rest differentials. They don't go west of basically Minnesota all year. I think this is a team that's going to could make the playoffs in this conference. There's going to be one bad team that makes the playoffs, and I think Detroit has as good of a chance as anybody. They're 4-1 on DraftKings to make the playoffs. I like that bet a lot. It's just and they're a fun team to root for. Like, there's nobody on this team there's nothing about this team that's sort of annoying or stupid. I kind of, like I said, I think that this is a team that bettors can get behind this year.
Well, you talked about the injuries on the offensive line. The other part of this was when they changed play callers a season ago, when Dan Campbell took over as a play caller. Jared Goff, 11 touchdowns, 2 interceptions after that. Was that a trend? Was that luck? Was that end of the season, teams falling apart? Who knows? The other part of this team is, we know about Amon St. Brown, but DJ Chark comes over. He was injured with Jacksonville a season ago. Jameson Williams, who is one of the rare guys, there's always somebody in the draft. You go, oh, he's so fast, he's going to blow right by NFL corners. And I always say, no, he's not. He's just not. It just doesn't happen that way. This guy might be that fast. He might be the kind of guy that could just rip open a defense and do some of the stuff that Tyreek Hill does. I love that draft pick. He probably isn't ready until the second half of the season. And then you almost forget about TJ Hawkinson, who was the top 10 draft pick for this team as well. So there are plenty of playmakers to go around if Goff ends up having that kind of year.
Yeah, absolutely. So Chark has been great in camp from what I've heard. Amon-Ra St. Brown was terrific last year. Hawkinson, as you said, I wrote that article about Njoku where when you draft a tight end that high, you're oftentimes drafting somebody else's breakout tight end. The Lions have done it, they've drafted first-round tight ends a few times. Eric Ebron was better elsewhere. Hopefully the Lions can get out of Hawkinson what they've drafted. and DeAndre Swift. Like, this team is, and Quintez Cephas, Josh Reynolds is an NFL wide receiver. Like, this team is much improved relative to last year, and I think that's why you bring in a quarterback like Jared Goff, right? Like, I always really, the Alex Smith era in Kansas City, I always think, well, Alex Smith wasn't the guy, but Alex Smith helped us find out that Tyreek Hill was good. He helped us find out that Travis Kelce was good. Jared Goff's not the guy in Detroit. But Jared Goff is there to help us find out that Amon-Ra St. Brown is good. He's there to show Detroit, where the ceiling is, so that they can go out and get a quarterback to help them achieve it. And that, to me, I think is, this is the year where I think that they bump up against that ceiling. They win. I think Detroit wins 8 or 9 games. Maybe they make a playoff spot. And it's very apparent that Goff is good enough to get them there. It's very easy in the NFL to go from 2 or 3 wins to 7 or 8 or 9. It's really hard to go from 9 to 12. And I think Jared Goff shows the Lions this year, like, where that deficiency is.
Yeah, they need Jeffrey Okudah to come back and from that Achilles and have a year for them. This is a passing division with good quarterback play, good receivers, so they need to come back. All right, I know you are on a tight schedule. I am a little bit too, so we're going to split the NFC in half. So we'll stop here. But before we take off, let's go through who you like and which bets you like here. Obviously, we know the Detroit Lions, you like them over. Anything else that you like? Who would you put under? What are the Packers right now?
Yeah, the Packers are at 11. That's kind of right where our simulation has them. I go Bears under 6.5, under 6. I think oftentimes people who model the NFL underestimate the likelihood that a team, they underestimate how bad the bad teams can be. And I think, I like Ryan Poles. I think Ryan Poles is going to be a good executive in the NFL, but this team is not equipped to win this year, nor do I think they have an incentive to win this year. So I think Justin Fields can overcome some stuff, but they don't. That's the under. So my bets in the NFC North, I like Rashawn Gary to win Defensive Player of the Year. I like Bears under. I like Kevin O'Connell to win Coach of the Year, and I like Detroit over.
And you like Rashawn Gary with 20 sacks. That's the one I'm going to come back to all year long. Rashawn Gary, if you do 20 sacks. You heard it here first.
Chris, if you do a Packers game at the end of the year, let's say December, and he's at 19.5 sacks, I want the shout out on Sunday. That's my only stipulation about the bet. If he gets there, we're play this clip or something like that, because I just think like the ingredients are all there for him to put together a truly amazing season. And I'm probably wrong, but if I'm right, I think it's a big payoff.
Forget what you get paid in cash. You will get that Sunday night shout out if we're doing one of those games. If that guy gets anywhere close to 20 sacks, I think he has the talent to do it. The growth that he's shown from his college days to where he is right now, if he makes that same leap again, you might get there. Who knows? Eric Eager, the man with all the insider knowledge on all these teams, will come back and knock out the other 2 divisions in the NFC maybe next week. But thanks, sir, and we will talk soon.